in person and 2 online talks. So the first one is, so let me check the title. So the first talk is efficient bootstrapping for approximate homomorphic encryption with non-sparse keys. And the paper is by Jean-Philippe Bossua, Christian Mouchat, Juan Troncoso Pastoriza, and Jean-Pierre Hubot. And Jean-Philippe will give the talk. Maybe first share on Zoom. Share button. Not share.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I would like to add that this is a soft merge with the next talk that will be given by John Woolley from Seoul University. So approximate homomorphic encryption is a kind of scheme that allows a third party to evaluate a function on a ciphertext without the knowledge of the secret key. And we call such scheme approximate when the decryption circuit correctness is relaxed to an approximate result. And this kind of scheme has been recently very useful for applications that do not require exact result or can tolerate errors, such as machine learning training or inference. The CKKS scheme is one such scheme, and it is currently the most efficient scheme for floating point, encrypted floating point arithmetic. It is a scheme that is based on the ring learning problem, and it encrypts the vectors of complex number. It is a leveled scheme, meaning that for a given set of parameters, one can only evaluate a circuit of a finite depth before either decryption is required or bootstrapping is needed. So the bootstrapping for the CKKS scheme is a complex procedure, which is still an area of research. And it has a multi-dimensional trade-offs between its computational cost, the residual homomorphic capacity, which is the number of operations that one can do after a bootstrapping before the next one is needed, the precision, and its failure probability and its security. And in this work, we improve all these dimensions by proposing novel algorithm for its core building blocks. So ciphertext live in a polynomial. Ciphertext live in a polynomial quotient ring and have a degree at most d-1 for d power of 2, and have integer coefficients taken modulo QL, large composite number of primes. And so to embed a message in this ring, a floating point message, we multiply it by a large scaling factor to enable fixed point representation. And when two such messages are multiplied together, the scale will increase exponentially. So to manage the magnitude of the scale, this scheme proposes a rescaling operation, which is to divide the ciphertext coefficient by one of the primes of the modulus, and which divide also the scale by an equal amount. The only thing is that when the rescaling operation is called, it returns a ciphertext that has one less prime, which was the one used for rescaling. And after L rescaling, we end up with a ciphertext at level 0 with only one prime, and we must either decrypt it or apply the bootstrapping procedure to bring it back to a higher level. So the bootstrapping procedure starts by bringing back the ciphertext at a higher level, and this changes the message to a new message that is the original message plus some multiple of the modulus Q0 added to the message. So the goal of the bootstrapping procedure is to apply a homomorphic modular reduction by Q0 to retrieve the original message. It starts and it ends with homomorphic special discrete Fourier transforms, which are evaluated with homomorphic matrix vector products. And in this work, we propose improved rotation keys for hoisted rotations, double hoisting speedup for the matrix vector product, but also merge sparse and unpacking and repacking for sparse plain text and merge constant multiplications. The middle step of the bootstrapping is the homomorphic reduction by Q0. And this is done by evaluating a polynomial. And this step has two main challenges. The first one is to find a good approximation of the modular reduction that is both precise and friendly for homomorphic evaluation. And the second one is to have an algorithm that can evaluate this polynomial without adding too much error while being still efficient. So the first challenge, I will let John Woolley will talk more about this first challenge in the next talk. And in this work, we propose a solution for the second challenge with a novel polynomial algorithm that allows to preserve the input scale of a ciphertext and to manage the intermediate scales such that it adds errorless addition through the entire evaluation, while at the same time being depth optimal and retain a low complexity. Additionally, we propose new updated 128-bit secure parameters of the bootstrapping instance. We also propose the first practical bootstrapping instance that does not use sparse secrets. Also on empirical failure probability analysis, a step-by-step algorithm for parameter selection and fine-tuning, and an open source implementation. So we evaluate our work against the previous state of the art using a throughput metric and a failure probability. The throughput is the number of plain text bits that are bootstrapped per second. And in the graph, we can see that our work has about up to 14 times better throughput than the previous state of the art. And that the instance that uses dense secrets still has a throughput that is about 4 times larger than the previous state of the art. So in conclusion, our improvement allows throughput for bootstrapping for the full RNS variant of the CKKS scheme that is an order of magnitude larger than the previous state of the art. And our work is implemented in the library Latigo, which is an open source library written in Go. And it currently has the only open source implementation for the bootstrapping of the full RNS CKKS. If you are more interested in our results and contribution, you can watch the full presentation and our paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I don't see any question on Zoom. So do we have a question here in the room? Anyone? The first one is always the most difficult, so just try. No? Okay. So thank you. Oh, you have one? No, sorry. So the second talk is also on bootstrapping. It will be online, if I'm correct. So there are four authors on the paper, or 5, I don't remember. So the title of the paper is High Precision Bootstrapping of RNS CKKS Homomorphic Encryption using Optimal Minimax Polynomial Approximation and Inverse Assign Function. So the author of the paper are Jung-Woo Lu, An-Sung Lee, Young-Woo Lee, Yong-Sing Kim, Yong-Seung No. And the speaker is Young-Woo Lee. So I guess you're in Korea, so thank you for staying with us so late.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. And thanks for introducing our team. And my name is Junwoo Lee, and this talk is about the paper High Precision Bootstrapping of RNS CKKS Homomorphic Encryption using Optimal Minimax of Polynomial Approximation and Inverse Assign Function. And this is the joint work with Eun-Sang Lee, Young-Woo Lee, Young-Sik Kim, and Jong-Sun No. The previous team explained the CKKS scheme and its bootstrapping very well. Our main focus of the research is the bootstrapping precision. Previous works regarding the RNS CKKS bootstrapping only reports 15 to 20-bit precision of the bootstrapping. This precision is not sufficiently high in many practical situations. So more precise RNS CKKS bootstrapping is needed in various applications. But previous works did not focus on the capacity of the bootstrapping precision. Thus, our key question is, how high precision can be supported by RNS CKKS scheme? And are there any further techniques to improve the bootstrapping precision? The degradation of the bootstrapping precision is generated in homomorphic modular reduction process. The function to be evaluated in this process is the blue graph. The previous works regard the target function as a part of a sign function, and evaluate the approximate polynomial for sine function. So there are two approximation steps in the homomorphic modular reduction process. In this work, we propose two new techniques to improve each approximation step. Polynomial approximation step is improved by improved multi-interval Ramez algorithm, and sine approximation step is improved by composite function approximation by inverse sine. The first solution is the improved multi-interval Ramez algorithm. The multi-interval Ramez algorithm is an algorithm for finding the optimal minimax approximate polynomial for piecewise function. But unlike the ordinary cases, our target function is rather extreme case. The length of intervals are very tiny. There are tens or even hundreds of approximation intervals. The polynomial degree is somewhat high, and we need very high precision approximation. So we find two optimization points to make the algorithm more practical, even for these extreme cases: two-mode search method and maximum absolute sum condition. With this method, we implement a robust, efficient, and high-precision variant of the multi-interval Ramez algorithm to approximate any piecewise function best. The second solution is the composite function approximation by inverse sine. This shows the sine function approximating the modular reduction function, which cannot exactly evaluate the modular reduction function. We propose to compose this sine function with the inverse sine function. If we compose the inverse sine function, the composed function is like this graph. This composed function exactly evaluates the modular reduction function in the approximation domain. And thus, the approximation error between the modular reduction function and the sine function is completely removed. The tables show the comparison between the maximum precision without inverse sine and the maximum precision with inverse sine. The maximum precision of the bootstrapping is 32.6 to 40.5, which is improved by 5.4 to 10.2 bits compared to the previous bootstrapping. So we could significantly enlarge the capacity of the bootstrapping precision of RNS CKKS scheme, which makes the RNS CKKS scheme more appropriate to various situations requiring high precision. So we verified that the new techniques significantly improve the precision of the bootstrapping. Thanks for listening to our talk.
Thank you. Questions? No. Oh. Okay, so then let's thank the speaker again. Thank you. So yeah, so next talk will be live. So the two authors of the paper are sorry, I forgot your name. Oh, Beiyou Li and Daniele Michencho, and the title is on the security of homomorphic encryption on approximate numbers. Just click on share. Okay. Propose yours.
Thank you for the introduction. This is a joint work with my advisor, Daniele Michencho. So this talk is also on homomorphic encryption, which is a crypto primitive that allows us to compute unencrypted data. And so also thanks to the previous two talks, we know that the CKKS scheme is now a very popular choice in many of the privacy preserving machine learning applications. So CKKS is a bit different from the typical homomorphic encryption scheme because typical schemes are exact, they satisfy the correctness requirement. But the CKKS is an approximate homomorphic encryption scheme, which means that the decryption result is only approximately equal to the underlying plain text computation result. So we studied the passive security model of approximate homomorphic encryptions in this work. In the passive security model, an attacker who can, we consider an attacker who can influence legit users on their choices of plain text messages and also their choices of homomorphic computations. The attacker can also eavesdrop the communication lines to learn ciphertexts. And also, very importantly, the attacker can also observe the final computation result in plain text. So typically, to formulate such passive attacker, we end up with the classic indistinguishability security, which is the classical security notion for exact homomorphic encryptions. And also, it is satisfied by the CKKS scheme under the standard lattice assumptions. The indistinguishability security definition is only concerned about the encryption and the evaluation APIs of the scheme. It does not concern about does not formulate the decryption API because the adversary already knows the decryption result for exact schemes. But this is not sufficient for approximate encryption schemes. So we introduced a new security notion, the indistinguishability security or indistinguishability with special decryption oracle security as a conservative extension of indistinguishability security for approximate homomorphic encryptions. We define it as a standard indistinguishability game. And in this game, the adversary has access to 3 stateful oracles. So we have the encryption evaluation oracle, which provide the same functionality as you would see in the indistinguishability security definitions. But we also have a special decryption oracle, which is kind of special. It only returns the decrypted result of honestly generated ciphertext. So here I want to emphasize that this indistinguishability security is very different from active securities such as CCA or CCA2 because adversary cannot pour this decryption oracle on an arbitrarily generated ciphertext. So for exact schemes, this decryption oracle does not provide any useful information, and we can show that this new indistinguishability security is equivalent to indistinguishability security for exact schemes. But for approximate schemes, this decryption query may leak information on messages or sometimes even the secret keys. So this brings us to the attack, the key recovery attack on the CKKS scheme, which, well, the CKKS scheme is typically instantiated on the ring RWA encryption, where the raw decryption function computes the inner product between the secret key and the ciphertext. So in CKKS, the decoding function doesn't do any error correction. It applies the canonical embedding on the scaled version of this plain text message. And the full decryption function is just the composition of the raw decryption function with the decoding function. It is a linear function in the secret key. So the attacker may just compute the inverse of this decryption function to learn the secret key. And this is exactly the underlying idea of our key recovery attack, where in this attack, the attacker can observe some ciphertexts and also can observe the decrypted numbers of those ciphertexts. With those information, the adversary can just, the attacker can just try to re-encode this decrypted numbers and then compute the inverse of the decryption function. So in practice, there are a few conditions has to be satisfied for this attack to be successful. But generally speaking, this implies that the CKKS is not a passively secure scheme. So we implemented this attack against many of the open source FHE libraries. And we conducted non-trivial attacks against them in order to make our attack harder. And we were able to successfully recover the secret key in almost all of those experiments. And we disclosed this attack to those library teams in October last year. And following the disclosure, there have been more sophisticated attacks being discovered. And also at this, following that, there has been some heuristic countermeasures implemented in those libraries. So in conclusion, we introduced the new security notion in the CPD security to formulate passive attackers against approximate homomorphic encryptions. That is equivalent to in the CPA for exact schemes, but it is strictly stronger for approximate schemes. And in fact, you can show that there exists a strict hierarchy of the variant of this in the CPD security based on the number of decryption queries. We also show that the CKKS is subject to a passive, very efficient, single efficient key recovery attack. And there has been heuristic countermeasures implemented in many of the open source libraries. And we also have full body secure countermeasures, but I think it is still open question to find an efficient solution to this in the CPD security. So with that, I'd like to finish my talk, and please check out the details of the definitions of the attacks on in ePrint. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, so are a question for Bayou? No.
Hello.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit confused about your definition of passive security, because although you're not provided directly a decryption oracle, you sort of see decryptions for ciphertext that you somehow indirectly created, as far as I understand. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that?
So my understanding is that you send or influence a message.
Yes.
And then there is some homomorphic evaluation possibly, and then there is a decryption step where you get to see the decryption of the message.
Yeah, so you can see the decryption of the ciphertext that's generated by the encryption of the evaluation oracles. Those are like honestly generated ciphertexts. Yes.
Yeah, it feels a little bit more than what in CPA, say I come more from the public key encryption literature, and it seems a little bit more than what just CPA gives you.
Yeah, so, well, if you consider like a passive security notions in the network setting, so the attacker can observe the communication lines, and also attacker can just observe the final computation result from the, if you consider that like a black box. So the final computation result in this context is the decrypted result. So decrypted numbers. So that's, I think that should be considered for passive attackers.
Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
More questions? No? So I have one for you.
Okay.
Did you look at other security notion? For example, looking at one-wayness as a security goal instead of indistinguishability?
Yeah, so we look at for example, just purely key recovery security, but we think so. Like the indistinguishability security should be the minimal security you are targeting for those schemes. So
yeah, that I understand, but your goal is pretty easy. So it's CPA or CPA plus. So you may have another goal. I mean, more difficult one in that case.
You mean like just to consider the key recovery?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you can formulate a weaker version of the security. Just say. Just to formulate the adversary's success being based on not able to recover the secret key. So yeah, it is. We actually consider that as a weaker security notion. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Sorry. No. So thank you. Okay, so I'd like the title of the next talk. So the title is The Rise of PHE. I'm glad because Pascal is just in front of me. So homomorphic secret sharing and public key silent OT. So the paper is by Claudio Orlandi, Peter Scholl, and Sofia Yakubov, and Peter will be given the talk.
It should be sharing. That's presented view. Okay. That should be good. Thanks for the introduction. So this is the rise of Pellier, which is joint work with Claudio Orlandi and Sofia Yakubov. And in this paper, we basically have a single main technique, which we use throughout the paper in all of our constructions, which is a way of doing a type of share conversion in settings using Pellier encryption by a new method of solving the distributed discrete log problem. And in the paper, the two main applications we consider of this constructing homomorphic secret sharing, which is a kind of distributed analog of homomorphic encryption you could use for secure two-party and multi-party computation, as well as an application to non-interactive generation of correlated randomness used again in secure multi-party computation. And with this correlated randomness, a special feature of our constructions that we can do this with just a simple non-interactive public key style setup. So I'm going to start by diving straight into the details of the core idea in this distributed discrete log setting. So in previous works, they mostly work with a prime order group G with generator G. And the idea is that we have two parties, Alice and Bob, who have some group elements, G0 and G1, which initially encode some kind of multiplicative secret sharing of a message X. So this ratio G1 over G0 gives us G to the power of the message X. And the idea of solving distributed discrete log is that we want a way of converting these multiplicative shares to give us additive shares of the original message X over the integers. So these integers Y0, Y1, which gives us shares of X. And going back to this breakthrough paper of Boyle, Gilboa, and Ishai from 2016, they presented a way of doing this, which is a special method of solving this discrete log problem, which has an inverse polynomial probability of correctness error. That's the main drawback of their algorithm. And even though you can make this error smaller, to do that, you have to work hard computationally, which means that in all applications, you end up with something very expensive to make this work out with small probability of error. So in our case, we'll be looking at the setting of Pellier encryption, where instead of a cyclic group, we have the group of integers mod n squared under multiplication, where n is now an RSA modulus. And in this group, the main thing you need to know is that it has this special element 1 plus n, which generates a subgroup where the discrete logarithm problem is actually easy to solve. And this is what we exploit to get an improved method of solving the distributed discrete log. So as before, Alice and Bob have inputs G0 and G1, which are group elements. So now going to be in the large group G. And now their ratio G1 over G0 will encode the message X, but in the exponent of 1 plus n. So it lies in this easy discrete log subgroup. And then we show that if you have this setup, there's actually a very simple procedure for solving the problem, which is just to apply this simple one-line computation to the group elements. So I take my input G0, G1, divide by n of the integers, floor this, divide by the original input mod n, doing this all mod n squared, and end up with an integer, which gives me an additive secret sharing of the original value X. We show that this gives you something with a negligible probability of correctness error. And moreover, it can support exponentially large inputs X, whereas the previous constructions were all limited to polynomially bounded X. So what do we do with this distributed discrete log algorithm? So firstly, we can use it to build homomorphic secret sharing, which, as I said, is a distributed analog of homomorphic encryption. So here we have two servers, Alice and Bob, who will receive some secret shares in some special secret sharing scheme of the inputs X, such that these preserve privacy as long as the servers don't collude. And then the homomorphic property means that there is a local evaluation procedure, which the servers can apply to the shares, which homomorphically evaluates some program P on the inputs. And this end up with shares of the result, which still hide the result until they want to reconstruct. And in our case, we'll be focusing on the setting where the servers can reconstruct by simply adding together their shares. So they get additive secret shares of the program P applied to the inputs X. And our main result here is a construction of HSS for evaluating the class of branching programs which you can think of as logarithmic depth circuits based on Palais encryption. And just as with the distributed discrete log algorithm, we obtain now this negligible probability of correctness error and exponentially large plain text spaces, which are things we only previously knew how to do using learning with errors. And I'll mention that there has been an independent work at Crypto this year, which obtained a similar result using the Damgård-Urach crypto system, which is a generalization of Palais. Okay, and the second application I want to talk about is generating correlated randomness, which is used often in a pre-processing phase of multi-party computation protocols. And this can be formalized as an object called a pseudo-random correlation function, which has a key generation algorithm, which outputs two correlated keys to Alice and Bob. And then these keys define some function, which can be evaluated on a public input of some nonce. And then each evaluation will give private samples to Alice and Bob in the form of some strings R0 and R1, which are some type of correlated randomness. So the examples we can think of are oblivious transfer correlations, where say Bob gets two random strings, S0 and S1, and Alice gets one of these, SB, for a random bit B. And we also do something called vector OLE, which is like an arithmetic generalization of oblivious transfer with secret shares. And our main constructions here are pseudo-random correlation functions for vector OLE based on Palais and OT based on quadratic residuosity. And both of these have this nice feature of a public key setup, where instead of having some trusted generation algorithm to generate the keys, we can actually replace this with a simple public key infrastructure. And the advantage of this compared with previous constructions is that we have very simple constructions based on standard classical assumptions and very small private keys as well. A drawback compared with a previous construction based on a variant of LPN is that computationally it's quite slow because we need to do exponentiations in a Palais group. So I'll just quickly summarize the results. Our main tool is this local share conversion procedure based in Palais groups, which we use to build homomorphic secret sharing with improved properties and pseudo-random correlation functions for generating correlated randomness, which we can additionally build with this public key setup to generate non-interactively all of the correlated randomness which Alice and Bob need for their secure computation. So that's all I wanted to say. And if you want to learn more, I hope you can check out the video or read the paper online.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? No? Maybe I can ask something maybe quite difficult, I don't know. How would you compare this year against the QR? So which one is more difficult for you? What's your intuition?
More difficult? So for homomorphic secret sharing, we have to use DCR. We cannot get the same from QR. So they give us different things. And QR naturally encrypts bits, which we use for oblivious transfer because it kind of encodes the receiver's choice bit. So they give us different things.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thanks again. So we are now moving to IO. So we have two talks. So first one is indistinguishability obfuscation from simple to state hard problems, new assumption, new techniques, and simplification. So this is by Romain Gay, Ayush Jain, Huikia Lin, and Amit Sahai. And Romain will give the talk.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. All right, so first, let me tell you what is indistinguishability obfuscation. There is an efficient compiler that's called the obfuscator. Am I sharing?
No, you'll need to share your screen.
Oh, let's start over. Okay. All right. Thanks for the introduction. Indistinguishability obfuscation from simple to state hard problems, new assumptions, new techniques, and simplification. This is a joint work with Ayush Jain, Rachel Lin, and Amit Sahai. First, let me recall what is indistinguishability obfuscation. There's an efficient compiler that's called the obfuscator that takes a program pi and transforms it into a functionally equivalent program pi tilde. And if there is another program delta, which implements the same functionality and has the same size, then it's computationally hard to distinguish between an obfuscation of pi and an obfuscation of delta. And this may seem perhaps a bit artificial, but this has been extremely versatile. In fact, together with minimal cryptographic assumption, IO is known to imply virtually all the known cryptographic constructions that are known. So this is an amazing unifying aspect of IO, but there is more. It also has helped expand the landscape of cryptography by allowing us to build new objects that were previously unachievable. So I've made a list here. And in fact, some of these constructions ended up being built from standard assumption later on. So IO is extremely versatile and extremely powerful. Therefore, it matters to build IO from stable grounds. And in particular, we would like to have probably secure construction from computational hardness assumptions with nice features. In particular, these assumptions should be simple to understand by non-IO expert, which means they must have a succinct description. They should be falsifiable, instance independent. That means, for example, that if you do not want one assumption per circuit that you're obfuscating, you just want actually a constant number of assumptions. And in the work I'm presenting now, we build the first IO from simple to state hardness assumptions. So simple to state assumptions are assumptions that satisfies all these features. And this is without multilinear maps. Our work was a stepping stone to the later celebrated results of Ayush Jain, Rachel Lin, and Amit Sahai that gave the first IO construction from well-studied assumption, well-founded. So that means like assumptions that has a long history of study. However, so we give a construction that's from simple to state assumption, but one of the assumption is new. Namely, we use 3 assumptions. The first one is a standard LWE, learning with error assumption. Second one is a standard assumption from bilinear maps, pairing. And the third one is new. It's LWE with leakage. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. But first, let me mention that as is typical for IO, we need all these assumptions to be sub-exponentially secure. So what is this new LWE with leakage assumption? It's essentially the combination, the interaction of 2 long-studied assumptions. The first one is LWE with binary noise, binary error. And the second one is the existence of constant depth Boolean PRGs. More precisely, it says that if you have a bunch of noisy linear equation with binary noise, and you run a constant depth PRG, pseudo-random generator, on the noise. So the noise is a seed. Then it should be computationally indistinguishable from these same noisy linear equation and truly uniform values. So we take parameters for which the learning with error with binary noise is secure, is known to hold. And we take a PRGs that we assume to be secure, and then we put them together in a sort of a circular flavor assumption, and we assume this also holds. I'm not going to give more details about this assumption. I will refer to the paper if you're interested, where we give a survey of known attacks, and we also provide new PRG candidates. So this is our results. Actually, to build IO, we build a public key functional encryption for all functions with sublinear efficiency, which is known to imply IO. But what's interesting is if you only care about a public key FE, which is interesting in its own right, then we only require polynomial hardness of the underlying assumption. So this is the first time public key FE was built directly from polynomial hardness assumption. Another advantage of our construction is that it requires less steps. It's a more direct construction than prior works. So conceptually simpler and also more efficient. With that, I'll just finish by mentioning a few open problems. The first one is to actually study more in depth this new LW with leakage assumption. Even though the latest work, JLS, removed actually the use of LW with leakage and replaced it with learning parity with noise, there's still some interest into studying this assumption, because in fact, many of the other independent IO construction also use some assumptions that are different, but also have this circular flavor or LW with leakage flavor. And so I think it would be worthwhile to study this assumption. It could give some insights to other constructions as well. And finally, one of the questions that I think is important in the field is to build IO from long-studied assumption without pairing. So from post-quantum assumption and without circular security. That would be a huge step forward. All right, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so no question on Zoom. Oh, there is one. So please, I'd like to know if Romain Gay saw the paper counterexamples to new circular security assumption underlying IO by Hopkins and others, and how it affects the assumption done in his paper to construct IO. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Let me see the question. I don't think it affects this paper, by the way. I think it's about this construction I just presented. It does not require. Oh, yeah, because I said there's a circular flavor. No, this attack, this paper mentioned, does not affect this paper that I just presented. It affects other papers. No, it doesn't apply. So it's a very high-level comparison that I was making. There is a circular flavor, but it's not the same assumption.
Okay, more questions? No? So let's move to the last talk of this session. Thank you, Romain. So next one will be online.
Yeah, hi.
Okay, so it's a candidate obfuscation via oblivious LWE sampling by Utekwi and Daniel Wicks. And Daniel, I'm saying here, so we'll give the talk.
Great. Can you see the screen? Can you hear me?
Yes and yes.
Yes, perfect.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Great. So I'm Daniel Wicks, and I'm going to tell you about candidate obfuscation via oblivious LW sampling. This is joint work with Utekwi. So let me start with our results in a nutshell. We give a new candidate construction of indistinguishable obfuscation, or IO. It relies on LW style techniques, but unfortunately, we don't know how to prove security under the LW assumption on its own. Instead, we formulate a new simple indistinguishable based assumption, and we show security under this new assumption. The assumption is simple, it's falsifiable, easy to state, and it has a certain circular security type flavor. Overall, because we rely on LWE techniques, the scheme is plausibly post-quantum secure, and the scheme is conceptually simple. So let me start by telling you what IO is. You already saw it in the last talk, but it's a way to take a program P and convert it, compile it into a new program P tilde, which is functional equivalent. On every input X, P and P tilde give you the same output. And the security says that P tilde should hide all of the internal implementation details of P. In particular, if you have two different programs, P1 and P2, that are functional equivalent, then when you obfuscate one or the other, nobody can tell the difference. So the obfuscation of P1 is computationally indistinguishable from the obfuscation of P2. And a long series of work showed that if you have this kind of IO, then you can use it to build all kinds of amazing cryptographic primitives. So the big question is, how do we build it? And there's been a lot of work on that. I don't have time to give you much of a survey, but instead, let me tell you about our approach. So our approach builds on a framework from by Brakerski et al. From last year. Their framework was called the split fully homomorphic encryption, or split FHE framework. And we give a small variant of it that we call functional encodings. And so we show that if you build these functional encodings, that implies IO. And then the question is how to construct these functional encodings. So functional encoding is a way of taking a secret value X and some public function F that has a long output. And what we want to do is we want to encode X in a way that reveals only the output of the function. It only reveals F of X, but nothing else about X. And so we could do that easily by just writing down F of X. But the goal is to do that where the size of the encoding is much smaller than the output size of the function. So that's what a function encoding is. It's relatively, or we can rely on prior works to show that function encodings imply IO. And then the hard part is how do you build these types of function encodings? And we do that by relying on LW style assumptions and crypto systems. In more detail, we rely on a fully homomorphic encryption scheme that's a small variant of the Gentry-Sahai-Waters FHE. We call it the dual GSW FHE, plus a new primitive that we call oblivious LW sampling that essentially allows you to create random LW samples without knowing the underlying secret. So this is a new primitive in our work. And we give a theorem. We show that with provable security, if you have LWE and oblivious LW sampling, then you get IO. In other words, we reduce the problem of building IO to the problem of building oblivious LW sampling. And I think there's something interesting here in contrast to other generic approaches of building IO, let's say from functional encryption. Here, oblivious LW sampling is a simple standalone primitive that doesn't talk about computation or computation encrypted data or anything like that at all. So this is a theorem we give, and then the heuristic part of our construction is constructing oblivious LW sampling. But again, there's a standalone primitive that does not involve general computation. So let me tell you a little bit more about our approach for building functional encodings. So we start with this GSW, dual GSW fully homomorphic encryption scheme. This is a scheme that lets you encrypt a secret value X and homomorphically evaluate some function F to get a ciphertext that looks like this. So this is an LW sample with respect to some public matrix A times an LW secret RF, where RF comes from the homomorphic, the randomness of the homomorphic computation, plus some error EF, plus the output of the function F of X times Q over 2. So here the output of the function F is M bits. M is, you should think of as large. And so the homomorphically evaluated ciphertext is just an LW sample, A times RF plus EF, plus the function output times Q over 2. And the nice thing about this is that I can break open this ciphertext for you and reveal the output F of X just by giving you the short randomness R sub F. So this lets us reveal the output of a large function with a small value. Of course, there's also the size of the ciphertext that encrypts X, which is actually quite large. But by doing this for many different functions Fi, we can amortize the size of the ciphertext so that the overall opening of all of these different functions is revealing all these different functions is smaller than just writing down the outputs. So the main problem with this approach is that if I reveal R sub F, this can reveal more than just the function output F of X. And the solution is to somehow re-randomize this ciphertext C sub F by adding in a fresh LW sample, and then essentially using the randomness S of that LW sample to re-randomize R sub F. The problem is, where do these fresh LW samples come from? And this is what we solve via oblivious LW sampling. It's essentially a way to use a CRS to generate fresh LW samples without knowing the secrets. And we give a formalization of this in the paper. And we give a candidate construction, which on a high level, once in summary, is that we create these LW samples by homomorphically evaluating, by homomorphically generating a pseudo-random LW sample using an encrypted seed for a pseudo-random function. Okay, so that's what I wanted to tell you about the construction. I don't have time to give you the assumption. I want to mention a few concurrent follow-on works. So first, there's works by Gainpaz and Prakersky et al. That get similar results using similar high-level framework, but they have different abstractions, implementations, and assumptions. So it's worth looking at all these works. There's also a follow-up paper that someone asked about in the last question for the last talk by Hopkins et al., which shows that these assumptions can be broken in their full generality using some contrived implementation of a PRF. So I think the takeaway from that is you need to be more careful about how you instantiate them. And there's a follow-up work at TCC, which gives a concrete instantiation of this scheme with a simplified PRF and results in a nice simple assumption that's open to cryptanalysis. So let me end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Question for Daniel? No. Last chance. Oh, there's one on Zoom. Okay, so yeah, I guess that's related to the previous one. So does this paper construct IO directly or construct XIO generalized on the theorem by Lin and others to get IO from XIO?
So at least for this talk, we go through the XIO framework. We first get XIO and then rely on the theorem of Lin et al. To go get IO from XIO.
Okay. So thanks again. So this is the end of today, so end of the session. But before leaving, so there is an announcement by Peter regarding the ROM session, I guess.